Okay, so officially welcome. Oh my gosh, 18 months later, and we're still talking about back to the office or return to office. Some people in manufacturing have been in the office already or in on the floors. And so, mainly the topic today is for those that have been pretty much working remote for 18 months. And so I thought this would be really topical today with back to office and then back to school. And so the month of September, we've been digging into these. So is it now or never? Or is it a hybrid? And is it here to stay? So today we're going to chat a little bit about back to office, return to office. We'll have some time for discussion and reflections, some strategies and tips, and then a Q&A at the end. And for those who don't know me, I'm Helen Patterson. I'm the founder of LifeWorks Well, which is an HR consultancy, and we help high performance and scaling organizations create heart-centered cultures. And it's been a challenge to, really navigate this time. So I took a break from the mentor circles over the summer just to kind of rejuvenate. And I have to tell you, the energy is not quite there yet, like it used to be. But I'm glad we can reopen the connections again. So just a welcome and acknowledgement, and you will see a pop-up every once in a while that needs to get fixed, but this is the technology world also. So just to acknowledge the land that we're meeting on, and I'm here in Toronto, so it's home to many nations. And I think it's really important, especially with September 30th coming up and the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, and all the news that's been happening with some of the uncovering of the unmarked graves and things like that, that we really take the time to dig into the journey of reconciliation and acknowledge those on who we are, whose land this was before. So I hope you're going to do something September 30th, and we at LifeWorks Well are continuing our journey to continue to learn and unlearn. Wow, is this a time? There have been so many ups and downs with people thinking they're going to be going back to work and then not going back to work. And, the overwork and overburden for people navigating through COVID. And we just really need to continue to keep stepping up, and the leaders need to understand what's happening at the front lines. So as we talk about this transition, and I've been working with a couple of clients and, addressing this, and now we're seeing more and more the governments are having mandatory vaccine passports here in Ontario. Some of the provinces are almost, it's almost like, this didn't hit them as much as in Ontario, but there have been waves, and we're heading into potentially the fourth wave. So it feels like we're in a ping pong game constantly. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and open it up for discussions, maybe chat about what you're doing in your offices. But primarily the focus has to be health and safety. And the last thing you want is to open up the doors, not have your protocols in place, and then some people end up getting sick or dealing with the COVID-19 virus that's still around. And I have heard a few cases about those that even with vaccines that have been getting it. So it's a tough thing to juggle because there's so many varying considerations. So we'll dive into that a little bit more, and I'll love to hear about what some of your organizations are doing. So quick reflection, just think about it. For 18 months, many people have been just at home, and then others have been going in like it's a day-to-day thing. And just take a minute to pause and think about how do you feel you personally have navigated this, and how do you think your organization has? And if you can put comments in the chat if you like, or happy to jump out. This is very interactive, but how do you feel that overall things have been going? For me, I feel like it's been up and down constantly. there are days where I have the great energy, and then there's all of a sudden I've been on Zoom, 3 days in a row, back to back almost, and I could just feel how exhausted I am. Yeah, so weigh in now if you like, or just think about that while we chat a bit more. And as I said, you can put your hand up. The reaction buttons are there at any time if you want to, have a chat with me. Often we get lots of people on here, and then others is just a couple. So it's always a good thing to have some dialogue. I always share some statistics, and yeah, I mean, this was earlier this year, KPMG. There's been continual studies and pulse surveys going on. So it's good to have this data if you are looking at trying to influence leadership about what the decision should be. It's good to have some data at your hands. And so right now, this was as of January 2021, and this is, we're several months later, that at that time there were 32% of Canadian employees who worked most of their hours from home. And so about 77% have the hybrid work arrangements, and they want that when the pandemic ends. If it ends, I don't know, but we'll see. And then 29% of Canadians would love to do half and half. Now, recently, I know a couple of organizations that surveyed, and it really is all over the map, but the majority do want to have at least, a couple of days in the office maybe, and in some cases, because they miss that connection. And I think that's what it's all about. But you can't have that in place and start going in until you have your plan. And we're gonna look at that a little bit. So yeah, and I'm constantly doing updates and putting some of this information on my website. So if you ever need some guidance and consolidating, look at my website first before you start doing your own research, because we try to keep on top of if there's any newer studies that have come out. So obviously people first, and I think that most leaders have really used this time to step up and try to provide the opportunity for flexibility and choice. And, ideally this has opened up that door to focusing on that well-being of employees first. We had to with the pandemic. And so what are the strategies and tips that you can help organizations, your leaders, if you're in a support role, encouraging them to think about it, but also communicating. The safety plan, there are some links, and I do send out these presentations after, but ontario.ca, obviously a lot of the government organizations have some safety plans and tips that you can go to if you don't want to reinvent the wheel. And if you haven't started thinking about that, many have already done that and are just creating plans and then just updating them. But you really do want to make sure that before people start getting in, you have those protocols in place. Ask the right questions. Most people, I hope, have surveyed and asked their employees or creative focus groups, because the last thing you want is leaders to just make the decision without talking to people about how they're feeling. And many organizations are still going to be looking at real estate costs over the next while. Leases might come up. Are we keeping our space? Are we going to go to co-working space? So I just put together a few tips there on things to be thinking about if you haven't already. The public transit issue, maybe we can talk about that later a little bit, because I think people forget that there's the getting to work as well. And historically, employers haven't really had to think about that. They've, people get to work and that's not really my issue. But now, with still this world that we're living in, the more public places you're in, there's still this fear, and you have to keep that in mind as well when you're thinking about how you're supporting employees. So it's not just, are you getting a mandatory vaccine policy? Are you, setting up your protocols and distancing and mask requirements? But all these other factors are top of mind for employees. So make sure you're looking at that besides the physical issues within the office. Accommodation. There has been, again, lots of law firms out there that are putting out some supports for this. It is important that if you do start developing some vaccine policies, that you have a place that employees can go if they need accommodation, because there are some that still have some medical conditions, or there is some other things that need to be accommodated that you need to keep in mind. And do you have a process? So I just wanted to highlight again that make sure you're thinking about the duty to accommodate, and that COVID-19, and there are a few different rules that may not have existed before from a human rights perspective. And don't forget employee privacy. So there's so much that goes into this thinking, and it changes by the moment. We just saw recently the Ontario Human Rights Commission came out with some guidelines around the mandatory vaccines and policies and employment standards. So you want to keep on top of that, and be able to be fluid in your response. But accommodation is one thing that put your mind to it now. Do you have a form that you want them to fill out, or is it just a talk with HR? If you don't have an HR department, is it someone in operations that a person can comfortably go to talk to them and maintain that confidentiality about their situation? So there's a lot of sensitive issues that are going on. I have a list of resources here. Again, I'll send those out. If you're not on our newsletter, you can sign up at lifeworkswell.ca, because we send out weekly, we send out a newsletter with whatever we're reading at the time, what we're listening to, but also whatever topic we're digging into for the month. You'll see the resources that we've been looking at. So those I'll send out as well. And then this is really just a real quick overview that I wanted to share. And whoops, I just went into there you go. You can see one of the samples there. Stop share. So I just thought right now, and I just wanted to make sure that no one else is joined. So it's a quiet group today. Didn't admit somebody else, but that's often what happens. And it's really just getting those resources. So that was just really, really high level. But I thought, what is it? What are the supports that people need right now? And what are the questions we should be asking that we haven't thought about? It takes a long time. Some people have been working on this. I'm part of the HRPA the HR Professionals Association, and one of the communities actually they've been sharing, which is really nice. So they've actually shared sample vaccine policies. And it's interesting to me that many, many companies are moving to mandatory. Now, a lot of them are quasi-government or municipalities or government. And, we have the vaccine passports now for restaurants. So it seems to me that every day more companies are mandating it. So I just open it up for a quick discussion. It might be a short mentor circle today, and have a one-on-one call. I thought that the main thing right now is this: should you mandate a vaccine? And I have had many people with mixed opinions on that. And just recently, though, with building management and with government and others saying we're requiring proof of vaccine, is that going to be the shift? Is that what we're going to see? Like everybody's going to start mandating it. I just was speaking with another organization this morning who manufacturing. They've been going in, and they haven't been really, really crisp on their mask policy. And they know that some people aren't vaccinated. So there's a bit of a risk there. So I said, it's really something you don't know how other people are feeling. So you really need to get this crystallized. You can't have a wishy-washy. You need to come up with what the policy is and have some processes, because it's on everybody's mind. So now, does anyone have any questions?
No questions.
No, I know. It's I'm just wondering if top of mind, if there is anything that like a one area that you need to think you need more help on or digging into?
I think for our organization, it's just, we're in the process of doing that vaccine policy. So just having that in place. And I think that I think senior leadership has a good handle on it. And they're working on it. And it'll be interesting to see what it actually ends up looking like. So
Yeah, and one of the other things that's come up for some is like, how do you collect the information? So because it is confidential, and where is it housed, and do you have an employee privacy policy that goes along with it? You know, some places are small enough that everybody's shared, because you remember at the time when people were getting their vaccine, like people were posting and really happy that they got it. And yet there may be some that didn't. And so that's where it gets really, really sensitive, as to like, how do you deal with that? And definitely the legal departments weigh in on, what's required, what's not, whether or not, that person has a real legitimate accommodation issue. It's really sensitive, right? So you have to proceed. And this is why I think up until now, like, it's only been recently, like within the last even month, I'd say, that you're seeing the vaccine policies coming out and the mandatory, because even in Ontario, as you know, it wasn't until recently that now you need the passport for restaurants. But I've been hearing
it's a tricky thing to deal with, because I think that I think people understand the need for the vaccine in order to protect themselves, but also to aid in protecting others. And I think that it's important to recognize that people understand that, but at the same time, there may be hesitancy around this public acknowledgement as far as the vaccine passport, and feeling like, I've been vaccinated, but I think it goes against my rights, or, whatever, to have to show proof of vaccination in a restaurant. Like, I think that's going to be a very tricky tricky thing to have to deal with, because I think there's going to be a lot of people that, they're all for vaccines. But the only time that really proof of vaccine is required is in school and in certain, healthcare professions. We've never had to present, that we've been vaccinated, to go to a restaurant or to a sporting event or a concert or stuff like that. So I think that's where a lot of the hesitancy is going to come from, is just, where is my right to privacy versus the greater good kind of thing. So,
and that is one of those, that's the biggest issue and that's why it's taken a while for people to say, what is this, what's our position going to be? And I find it interesting, because so the concerts have started, the outdoor, and they are requiring them, the proof. But if you think about looking down at the US, like we follow the college football and stuff like that, and you see these 100,000 fans in the stands. Georgia, oh well, we have here, it's go blue. It's always go blue. I don't know. Oh no, that helmet's probably on the ground right now. It was on the back when my husband was using the office. He would have his up there, but which is funny. But my husband's mother was born in Michigan, and they grew up in small town Chatham, so not far from the U.S. border. Windsor's closer, and it's just so, for some reason, this is what came into our household, and it's like there's so much maize and blue in this house, and you've got yours on. I should have worn mine. I didn't know. But we were watching one of the games, one of the whiteouts, or what, so it's all white shirts, everybody's, and it's just like, I can't believe it. It's like, okay, so I don't know. I don't think they have mandatory passports. There's different parts of the world, right? That and up until this, the government hasn't wanted to like be the ones legislating this because of this whole freedom issue and things.
I think it's a difference in mindset too between the US and Canada. The US is, we're much more outspoken and we're much more ready to put up a fight on anything that we feel like is infringing on our rights, and our right to privacy and, our right to bear arms and, our right to, all of these other rights and stuff. We're much more outspoken and willing to fight the establishment, if you will, then, I think Canadians think that way, but they're not, it's not as pronounced and it's not as obvious,
Yeah, although there's been recently some of those
Yeah.
Protests at hospitals and things like that. So there is this tension all the time, right? So I think what I would say is the main thing is that you have to look at the organ, like from an employer perspective, and you're supporting your leadership making these decisions. It's like you have to kind of look at what's best in your organization. And so as an example, as I said, a lot of the manufacturing, I know quite a few people that have been working this whole time. They've been going into a place and some of them, I'm aware of a couple that aren't vaccinated. And so it's quite interesting, even like this restaurant situation. So there could be potentially people working in that restaurant that aren't. Like we as a patron going into a restaurant, we're going to provide our proof. But I don't know that we know that they all are. It's sort of an interesting contradiction.
That's I've heard that argument a lot. It's like, well, so you're asking me to provide you proof. Well, can I see your proof? Can I see, you're taking me to my table. Where's your proof? My server, where's their proof? The cook, where's their proof? Where does it end? And I think that's going to be a big issue for a lot of people. It's like, why do I have to show proof to go into this establishment when the restaurant doesn't have to show proof that they're employees?
Yeah. And then when we get to the issue of like, if you do mandate this proof, what are you going to do if someone refuses? What are you going to do if they don't? Like, that's when it can get very, very like, are you going to let someone go? And that's, you don't even want to go there, which is why I think most people have been fine with like, let's continue with this hybrid and we don't have to worry about it. But now that it's opening up and there's even interim protocols, there's still some issues. Like if you're in the office, is everyone wearing a mask at all times? Or do we have enough space? And there's where that hesitancy is like comfort zone. You can't just apply what I think is best and what's working for me. You have to survey that workforce, try to get a sense, do the right thing in a very respectful way. And, larger organizations, they can do it a little bit more easily because so much of it isn't identified, right? But when you start to get smaller and people are smaller offices, there's a little bit more open. People forget about protecting that privacy. And so really what we've been just doing is, and I work with, smaller companies that need that support, is just looking at what makes sense for the organization, but also following all those legal requirements if you have to. I mean, you're not going to be breaching those, and really just communicating with people. Like, that's the thing. I'm really interested in this hybrid work a little bit too, because to me, it's just like, in a way, to me, it's no brainer because I've had to do it even prior to the pandemic, where I'm remote a lot, or I'm not in a physical space. And many people have proved they can work well. So what is there this still lack of like honesty? Like, is there some fear of people aren't productive or they're slacking off? Well, I think that you have to look at the outcomes. Like, is work being done? And if it is, and it's being done well, why are you pushing people to come back in? So that's another thing, is just, keep that in mind, like looking at how people have worked. Maybe it's not good for everybody. Maybe they can't focus because they've got so much going on at home. So you have to kind of take it down to an individual level, don't you think?
I think so. I think because you've got some people that, have been working from home for 18 months now at the kitchen table. And,
Yeah.
and I think that they would much rather,
Mhm.
because they don't have the physical space, inside their house or apartment or,
Mhm.
whatever. And so I think that, there are a lot of those people that may be very interested in going back to the office because just their physical setup is not conducive to proper ergonomics or, just, being able to separate and have that work-life balance, because for 18 months now, that work is just, it's always right in front of them. I'm
Mhm.
fortunate where I have a separate space in my house that's just my office. And,
Mhm.
I can't shut the door because then the cat would get mad at me, but,
Oh, I have
but
scratching.
I have
I
that space where I can separate. I can turn the light out and go into another part of my house and I don't see my work. But I think that there's a lot of people that don't have that luxury. And I
Mhm.
think that has to be taken into account. So
Yeah. And then one of the things that, thinking back, like I think about things that, you learned from, one of the things, we had been talking about in some cases is like, no one knew it was going to be this long, but if you are at a home place, are you ergonomically set up? And so there's all these things that, okay, if you're going to keep this going, like if you thought it was temporary, well, hopefully by now people have a comfortable chair. But if they didn't, I mean, that's on the employer. That really should have happened. And the employee does need to let us know, right? If there's something, but also, that should be, if you have a home office, are you ergonomically set up? So this hybrid space, if it's going to stay, do you have the tools you need, like your laptop, your monitors, a good comfy chair? But then it's like there's a duplication of cost potentially. So there is those other factors that if you're going to still have an office and then you're going to have a home office, that could be double if you were buying the desks, if you were doing this. So and then there's health and safety, like what happens. So there's other things that sometimes people forget to think about when you're continuing with a hybrid, which
yeah,
is why we'll probably see this like co-sharing or leases being, not renewed. What do you think about that?
yeah, I think you'll see a lot of that. And I think it's something that has to be, implemented as part of the budget. But it also has to be an education piece with the employees as well um, because there's tax implications. Um, taxable
Mhm.
benefits, is this a taxable benefit? Is it, just a tax implication where the employee is responsible for the purchase of their desk, but because it's used for work, can they, deduct that cost at their taxes if they choose to do a long form, return or, so I think it's a conversation that management has to have. And then there's that education piece with staff on
Yeah, absolutely.
on accommodations, on ergonomics, on what is required, because I think there's some rules around what can be deducted on your taxes as far as,
Yeah.
whether work, it's mandatory. I think there was some stipulations made for last year. I haven't heard if there's going to be anything for this tax year, if there's going to be those same kind of
Mhm.
things that were put into place last year on just a
Uh,
straight,
Yeah.
straight return of, with the deduction of this or, doing a long form to do that longer,
Mm.
item by item kind
And
of thing.
those are really good issues that, often people just forget about or they've just been operating and don't think twice about it. And the longer it is, it's like, okay, well, is this the new reality? Is it a hybrid? Is it, I'm going to, like, you need to at some point draw the line in the sand because people don't want to keep living in limbo and working in limbo in a way. So the sooner those, and even if the protocols or the policy changes a bit, it's like people like to know what's happening in the near future, and then is this going to change? We know that lots of people moved over this time. They got out of the city. They wanted to be around other people, or they felt, but those were decisions that you make, and who knows? I would say I would like to see another study, and I'm going to probably look at this and I'll share resources if I found them, but on the commuting, like the whole issue of commuting and how, I'd love to see if there's any study or differences in people moving closer to because people used to move closer to their office location so that they could just have a little walk or whatever. Whereas some people have probably moved way further because they just assumed I'm going to be online. And so it's like, is it ever going to go 100% online? And I think that maybe technology companies, like a lot of tech companies, they had gone online, they can work online, but then even some of those large ones are bringing people back. So finding that right balance, and like connection's important, right? Connection's important. We're going to get through this at some point, hopefully. Like, I wonder when we'll be able to say that it's ended.
Yeah. When does it go from pandemic to endemic?
Yeah, that's a good one. Oh, I got to remember that.
When does it make that change from, epidemic, pandemic to endemic, where it's kind of like the flu, where it's seasonal and it's only in a, very limited geographical area, or, that kind of thing, or is this just, is COVID-19 the new flu? Is it something that we're just going to have to deal with every year? And I think that right now we don't know that, because it's still very much global. It hasn't been isolated to just one particular region. And I think that's what is scary, because nobody likes the unknown. And there's still too many unknowns to make a lot of these decisions. And I think that's part and parcel of the problem. It's like that, we're surfing and, we're riding that wave, and then all of a sudden the board just goes out from underneath us because the wave changed course really quickly, or, so.
And that's one of the biggest skill sets that we've had to help, develop those resilience muscles and those agile muscles and flexibility. Like, if you need to be able to just handle that, it's going to constantly change. This is a little off topic, but we were talking about this whole great resignation, this whole thing about not only is everybody dealing with, well, how is my employer? How did they step up during this period of time? And if I do want to work 100% remote and my company doesn't want to let me, maybe that decision gets made. I want to go somewhere where I get what I want. So is it a flexible workplace? So there's this whole, like, people are leaving, or they just realize they don't have meaning in their job. And, they sort of saw how their employer treated them during this, and they're moving on to hopefully much better, greener pastures, right? So, but that's this other reality. So companies really, really need to take the time to make sure that they're treating people well, that they're providing them the supports they need, that they are having open communication, and that they're doing what's right for their organization, because it has been very difficult. And so those that have stepped up, that have weathered it and are making it through, will hold on to more employees, and they'll be very thankful that they were treated really well during this whole, process in this time period, and can look back and say, you know what, I was really happy and proud to be part of that organization, and the leaders treated me really well. So this next little phase, I think, that's why I sort of said back to office now or never. Like, we don't know yet. In some cases, it might be never. They're getting rid of their real estate. In some cases, it's going to. I really feel like this hybrid. This is the new norm. I think is that there isn't going to be this expectation to just be in the office all the time, unless you're in a company that, if you have roles that are manufacturing, they have still been going in. But so when we talk about office, we're thinking about more of the knowledge workers, or people that have typically been in, office locations versus, some of those manufacturing plants and stuff like that. And even restaurants and hairdressers and like other support services, they've been still, it's sort of flexible. And, I've been thinking a lot more now about the safety in going there. Like there's still a little bit of hesitancy because I just found through the grapevine, like someone was very, hadn't had the vaccine and was sick, and it was in a salon. And so it's like, oh, you're thinking you're going into a place and there's still this risk to you. And it feels like you want to try to get the judgment out of it. Like you're trying to be very open. Okay, people, I respect people's decisions. But at the same time, there's, people and employees going home. They might have like under 12 kids, or they have aging parents that they're caring for. And so there's always that, like, you're carrying something that you pass on, right? I'm not a scientific person, so I try to look at that. But my daughter is, and so she'll often say, quote me some numbers about, did you know that people that have been double vaxxed, this is how many people had COVID? And I'm like, okay, but what's the situation? Educate yourself. So I guess some word of advice is like, really do the research, make sure you're talking to people internally, that you're not just making decisions without any sort of thought process of whether it's focus groups or surveys. And then it's just a decision has to be made at some point. I've heard a couple of people who are like, yeah, just put the mandatory vaccine passport in, like request it. And I find that interesting too. Like some people just want to do it.
I think when it comes to decision making and in a situation, like in certain situations, yeah, leadership just needs to make a decision, implement it, and get it over with. But in a situation like this, I think that having that employee input and really understanding what the employees are feeling and having employees feel like they were a part of the decision creates less animosity and more buy-in to the ultimate decision. So I think that's very important.
Well, listen, this has been great. We've had a one-on-one interview of you pretty much. It's nice to get the real, you can come in and we can chat about theories and everything else, but it's always good that you can take some practical experiences and say, hey, here's a bunch of supports and resources. It'll help you, but you still need to kind of think about, what is the impact where you are? And that there's going to be so many differences of opinion. So it's just like, at least if you're engaging and doing it thoughtfully, regardless of the final decision or the outcome, at least people feel like, okay, it's not the ideal policy or process that I wanted, but at least, we tried to do it with people's opinions involved. Let me just ask you one last thing and then we'll wrap up. I'm just thinking about, if as we're coming up to, it's end of September almost, but we're going to start getting into winter and cold and who knows what else. Like, is there any recommendations that you'd make, like having gone through this now? Because, certainly we all could say, oh, I could have done this better, or this is what I would have done. Is there anything you would want to share on, hey, here's some things to think about from an employee perspective or from a operations, even, leadership, having managed so many things in your experience that you would recommend organizations do?
I think just being open and transparent. I think that calms a lot of fears. Having that formal communication versus the informal communication. Informal communication, you get those water cooler chats with people, through, your chat or, individual phone calls or, things like that. And so that's where the rumor mills start, the grapevine and, all of that kind of stuff. And it's hard to, once those get going, it's like wildfire. I think there's been I mean, I think there's probably been a little less of that type, throughout the pandemic, because we haven't just met in the hallway or in the kitchen getting a cup of coffee or,
Mhm.
things like that. But I think just, keeping people updated, on this is
Yeah.
what we're doing. I mean, I know that, our organization has been fairly good at that. I know when I did, a few years ago, when I did an office move, I updated all the time. I probably over communicated. And I think that over communicating in certain situations is much better than under communicating, because when you over communicate, at least people have the information, whether they want it or not. But when you
Mm.
under communicate, then that's where self-imposter syndrome and, your voice inside your head starts really circling the wagons and creating those situations that may or may not ever come to fruition. And a lot of times they can be negative. And then it's hard to get people out of that mindset. So I just think open, honest, regular communication and
Yeah.
check-ins is probably
Yeah.
the most important things that an
And
organization
it's,
can do.
yeah, and it's amazing, even pre-pandemic. I mean, that has been an issue that has come up a lot. And this whole thing, can you over communicate or not? But it's the less said. I mean, that's what causes all this anxiety in employees and, the unknown, as we talked about a little bit earlier. And really it's about the main thing I've heard a lot over the last 18 months has been those that have been very open and have, had the regular forums to get together, have had a lot more communication and openness, have been the ones that are going to be successful and continue and learn from this and all of that. So that's a great way to end, I think. So I just want to encourage anybody watching this later, they can check out the presentation, the links in the presentation, also the website lifeworkswell.ca. There's always additional resources and a whole bunch of blogs up there that we publish that have some of these tips in more detail, like safety plans and all of the good resources that we've uncovered. And so if you're, navigating that, or you can always book a consultation with me through that as well. Reach out to me, Helen at lifeworkswell.ca. And I think I really appreciate us having this one-on-one because I know, we know each other and I respect a lot of the work you do, and that often all these things behind the scenes that leaders and people don't realize that there are so many considerations. And I'm just glad that you hopped on today and we could have a one-on-one chat because you have such a wealth of information and you touch so many things and know, having lived it and having to actually help an organization, from IT to operations and all these things, and get through this. So your knowledge is so valuable. So I'm going to sign off, and then yeah. So happy that you could join it. It was a quiet one today. I had quite a few other people, but I don't. It's funny. It's trying out the different times. Friday at noon, maybe. Fridays and Mondays. I'm not sure they're the best days. I think people are always dealing with those last minute things that need to get done. So thanks for joining, and
Thanks for having it.
yeah, and we'll see you another time. So have a great weekend. Okay.
You too.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.